Hello there, and welcome to the Gina Gardner and Friends Show. I'm Gina Gardner, and I'm joined today by Wendy Lee. She's an amazing lady, an international influential speaker, a transformational life coach and author, and she's been the lead singer of a top 40s band. My goodness me, what an eclectic mix that is. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you, Gina, for having me. We've already had some early conversations and I can't wait to dive in.
No. So before we get started, I think it'd be really helpful. We're going to be talking about leading a life you love and the importance as a leader of leading yourself. How did you get to this place? Give us a potted version of how you got there before we dive into the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question because, we all have a journey and I love to learn as well of other people's journeys. So I basically started not in the leadership category. In fact, if you asked like the 20-year-old self, did I consider myself a leader in any aspect of my life? It would have been a very firm no.
Right.
I was very shy. I didn't know how to interact. I kind of just melded into anything that was going on around me, whether it was at work, in my relationships, in business. I felt better when somebody else was telling me what to do, and then I could just do it because I hadn't really found the true essence of myself. But I was a hard worker, right? So anything I lacked in self esteem, I made up in hard work and effort, and it paid off. I eventually moved my way through the corporate world and found my way into human resources, where I spent 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder and eventually reaching the level of senior vice president of human resources, which is a really big deal, especially the company that I was at. There wasn't any other women that had reached that group. But there was this strange thing that was happening. I had all this success, quote unquote, in my corporate life, but I was struggling in my marriage. In fact, I was going through a divorce. And it was like, how in the world can I be so successful in one area of my life and not in the other? And the funny thing is that, in life, there's things that happen that help us to pivot. I'm from the South, so I call it a getting hit over the head with a frying pan moment where it really gets your attention, right?
The universe certainly has a way of doing it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I mean, I probably had some whispers and some little nudges before that, but sometimes we're hard-headed and we're stuck in our patterns, and I just didn't realize it. So really out of frustration and surrender, I was like, I put my hands in the air and I said, something has to change. And I found myself getting connected with a transformational life coach and on a retreat. And on that retreat, I learned about the concept of masculine and feminine energy. And guess what energy I was almost at full blast in?
I think it's so common for women leaders to believe that actually they need to behave like less hairy men rather than recognizing that when they are in their feminine energy, they have so many resources to call upon. And I would say to men, if you're listening, feminine and masculine energy is not about feminine and masculine gender. It's about whether you're in left brain thinking, which is logical, but it also tends to deal with either or and catastrophize. Whereas
Yes.
when you're in a right brain, which we tend to ascribe to feminine energy, you're in solution mode, creativity, empathy, relationships. And so I think, there's so many times when it's modeled that being aggressive is the same as being assertive, for example. And I would say that they're very, very different. But anyway, do carry on. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because it's true. And basically, there's, both spectrums. Like I call it the uber masculine, right? Or the unhealthy feminine. We need both, but when we get too far in either direction, whether we're a man or a woman, then we're not living kind of in that balance. And it doesn't mean that it has to be 50-50. It just means that you have access to that energy when you need it. We need the masculine energy. The masculine energy is kind of the container, right? It's the structure that holds so that we can feel comfortable and safe and free to express ourselves. Like you said, be creative and come from the heart. And when you turn those pieces off, you definitely are not showing up in a way that everybody can benefit from. Because I know, even though it's not probably talked about as much, my male counterparts, which I was one to many, I was usually very often the only woman in the room, especially the higher up in the ladder I got.
Yeah.
They're just as burned out as we are. So this bringing in your compassion and your connection versus, being competitive and collaborating and all those things, everybody can benefit from that. And so I just started on this crusade for myself. I was like, oh, I think I figured it out. I'm the common denominator in all of these situations.
Yeah, we certainly are. So I've got a very strong idea of what I think conscious leadership is, but what would you say conscious enlightened leadership is? And why do you think it's important? Or do you think it's important?
Yes, I think it's very important. And I think that's why you and I have crossed paths. Because when we're in that energy, you start realizing, oh, there's a lot of people floating up in this energy of wanting to be a thoughtful, conscious leader. And I think that really we can only stay the old way so long, right? And it works when it works. And then when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I feel like, especially over the last couple of years, we've all experienced the universe is trying to get our attention. Like we'd been there, did that, got the t-shirt, you know the saying.
Yeah.
We're on this more thoughtful because nobody can sustain that hustle culture, that getting energy, like I need to be with you because I got to get something from you, versus how we can serve. But sometimes, and I'll just speak for myself and for women just because that's who I work with, but it really is for everybody. Sometimes because we haven't learned how to, we feel like we have to give to depletion. That's not conscious leadership.
No.
That's
self-care first and foremost. They talk on the airplanes, don't they? Put your own oxygen mask on first.
yes. And that's really what this is. But we've been taught, and again, especially since women, that it's selfish to put ourselves first. And in true form, we are caregivers, right? A part of our nature and who we are, genetically built. And nobody can sustain that. I say that it's neither sexy nor sustainable. And when you start with yourself first, it's selfish, meaning you make yourself a priority. So your mental well-being, your mental health, learning about yourself, learning about your past, understanding that your reactions and your behaviors today have a lot to do with things that maybe you need to give a little love and compassion to that you've been through, right? Because when we do that, we clear that generationally back and the path forward. And it just starts with us. And part of it is like, can it really be that easy?
It's that easy, and it's actually that difficult.
Yes.
But I just want to backtrack for a minute, particularly about this issue of being selfish. If you put your priorities first. And one of the models that I use with people is, if you imagine a jug of water or whatever your tipple may be, and you start to fill glasses, and that jug, which has a finite amount of liquid in it, it will soon run out, it will run dry. But if you imagine that jug under a tap being filled up, and you're able to use the overflow, and the tap is consistently on, you're never going to run out. And I think women particularly have been conditioned through their childhood that it is selfish to think of yourself first. And I think if you're talking about self-love, I think we need to make the distinction between being self-love and self-indulgence. So self-love is about looking after yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. It's not about indulging yourself in a donut, consistently, or I'm feeling fed up, I'll go and buy a new handbag, or, I'll sit and watch the telly rather than taking a bit of exercise on a consistent basis. Because if you really love something, whether that's you or a member of your family or your pet or your garden, you look after it.
Yeah.
You really nurture it. And I think we've got to realize that nurturing yourself does not mean self-indulgence. And stepping into your genuine power is nothing about having dominion over other people. Because when you're in your genuine power, you want the best for other people and you nurture them.
Yeah. And that's the reflection. I mean, you said it so perfectly, Gina, because when we do that, then when we step into relation with anybody, a relationship with anybody, because our perception of ourselves
Yes.
has really gone back to its core, its root,
Yes.
right? Because we're just disconnected from it. Now, when people come in front of us, we're going to see and take them in differently because we see the world of how we feel about ourselves. And I feel like that's really the root of all of this. Yes, it starts with us, but then it creates this curiosity, right? With the people around us, like, ooh, I want some of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just splinters out like light. And this is how we change the collective consciousness. It kind of starts here and then we move forward. And then all of our relationships are richer, they're deeper, we're connected. We're not on this side and you're on that side. And even though we're going to have judgments and thoughts and things, because that's how it works, we have tools now and we have the ability to say, is this really true? And maybe we just get curious with one another and have these conversations. That's what leadership is about. That's what leading is. It's not the old paradigm as somebody's up here, I'm down here, and there's this big expansion between where you are and where I am. We're all in this together, right?
It's interesting. I've worked with many companies, and some of them have been very successful before we started working together. Some of them have been in really challenging situations. But the one common pattern with all of these is that once the leaders had taken responsibility, and I talk a lot on this show about radical responsibility for how they show up moment by moment, that makes the difference in terms of their business. But so many businesses start by looking at profitability, and they may make short-term gains, but it's not sustainable because they create a culture which is so destructive and toxic, and people don't have any ownership of what's going on, that they become disillusioned, their productivity goes down, their health isn't great, absenteeism, and they leave.
Yes.
And I think, we were talking before the show about the need to do things differently. I think it was the Dalai Lama who talked about the future success of the world is in the hands of the Western woman. And I think that to a large extent may be true. I'd like to just slightly alter that. I think that the future is in people engaging fulsomely in their feminine energy. Because I think men have had a bit of well, in one sense that they have had free reign for thousands of years, but I think they've had a bit of a bad deal in the last few decades. And this is about, we've got to work together. We've got to look how collectively we can make a difference. And if we don't start doing it soon, we're going to be in deep trouble, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, we've gotten the warning.
Oh, we have.
We've gotten the warning, right? Now it's up to us. I love that you use the word responsibility, radical responsibility. I kind of look at the word responsibility as response
Yes.
dot ability.
Yes.
The ability to respond changes everything. And
Well,
if you haven't taken the time to go back and cultivate your side of the street and look at what's coming up for you, you're going to respond in default patterns. So you're going to see things as a threat and you're going to see things as a conflict until you get it right here with your heart, right? And then you have a different ability to respond. And then you take responsibility for that. And
for
everything
me,
changes.
the way that I see it, the research shows that 95% of most people's reactions are habitual. There's cycles of behavior, thoughts, behaviors, emotions, and so on. And then somebody says something, for example, in a tone of voice, and it triggers that person because it sounds like a critical parent or a critical teacher. They bite back without even thinking, which triggers the other person. And before you know where you are, there's a full-blown row. But when you take radical responsibility, it shifts it from you being reactive into proactive. And you then actually have an active choice in terms of how you deal with it, how you respond. And that's power. That gives
Yeah.
you that opportunity to do things differently. Wendy, I know you're working with people and that you're the author of a number of books. Talk us through what you're doing with people and how that's making a difference.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I've so enjoyed this conversation. It's like I feel I'm getting animated because it's so important, right?
Yeah, I
And
agree.
we have the ability and the chance right now to make a difference. That was part of why I decided to leave the corporate world. I didn't leave the corporate world because the corporate world energy was bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had already changed within the corporate world. And that's what we need to take on is wherever environment you are, it's not about just escaping and then doing something else. So that's why I wanted to have a bigger audience. Being just in the corporate world and working for someone else, I wasn't able to do that. So what I'm helping right now is I work with women. I do have some male clients, but primarily women. And it's my preference is that it's in a group setting.
Okay.
There are some one-on-one coaching, but there's something about when you can witness other people, because so many times as women, and just raise your hand if this is true for you, it's easy for us to take things on our own. It's easy to isolate. It's easy to feel like I'm the only person and I better not speak up because, social media makes everybody's life look 100 every single day. Right. And so we tend to do this. But when you get into a group setting and you bring up these issues of how is your past affecting your decision and your choice of today? How are those default patterns coming in? What can you do? Like, I have not figured out the formula or the magic pill for that default message to come in. But what I do is I get curious and I'm like, first of all, is it true?
Mm-hmm.
99% of our thoughts are big fat liars. They
Yeah.
mean well, they want to keep us safe, but it's not the truth. And then, second, curious. I wonder why that's coming up. And how am I showing up? And what is my part in this? Where the old model is, oh, this person is making me feel this way, or this boss is making me feel this way, or this partner, whatever it is, right? It's easy to target people, but when we get the responsibility and we bring it in, and it's so needed because we're just on autopilot. And the people that are at the top, whatever that might be, whether they rule by you do what I say kind of old mentality or the opposite, it comes from the same energy. It still comes from the same wound, but it just manifests itself in a different way. But we both parties still have that little sense of, am I good enough? Am I being an imposter? Will people like me? I don't care which side of the spectrum you land, that's the core of it. And that's what I really help particularly women with. Let's get deep down. I'll hold that safe space. You're in good hands. And we can do this together because I can't see what's in me and you can't see always what's in you. So having a neutral, supportive party is very helpful because once you start excavating, you said it, it's easy, right? But it's hard. It's easy and feels simple, but that's why it's called work. You got to put a little effort into it and you are worth it. We are so worth it.
Absolutely. So where can people get hold of you?
Yeah. So there's several ways that people can get a hold of me. You can follow me on Facebook under Wendy Lee. On Instagram, I'm Lead Hership Revolution, and on LinkedIn under Wendy Lee. And my website is leadhershiprevolution.com.
Brilliant. So we're pretty much at the end, Wendy. I'd like to say a huge thank you for joining me. We could have carried on all evening, I'm sure. But I would say to you, all of you who are listening, is you are the common denominator in your life, and you have an active choice if you choose to make it. Every decision that you make has consequences. And often it's when we don't make an active decision and we just let things drift that the consequences are the most far reaching. So why not take the opportunity to really look at your life and audit what you're doing, and to look at those parts of your life which are working and those which are not, and decide to take some action. If you want some help, email me at Gina, Gina, at genuinely-you.com. That's Gina at genuinely-you.com, or go and look at the website of the same name. All it remains for me to do is to say a huge thank you to Wendy, and a thank you to you, the listeners. I'd love to hear from you. Do take care, and we'll see you on the next show. Bye-bye now.
Thank you, Gina. Be well.
Thank you.